What's up guys, Lon here from Android Authority, and ASUS made quite the splash a couple of years ago with the Zenfone 2, mostly because it offered some rather impressive specs at an extremely low price point, but nowadays phones with high-end specs and good build quality at an affordable price are a dime a dozen. So what does ASUS's latest flagship do differently to make it worth considering? This is the Zenfone 3 Deluxe. There's a lot that a phone has to live up to, especially when it uses a word like deluxe in its name, and in most aspects the Zenfone 3 Deluxe does deliver. Just as you would expect from a flagship phone, the build quality is fantastic. It's an all-metal unibody design that both looks and feels great. You have chamfered edges going around the front and back, a sloping curved back and rounded corners and sides that all combine to give this phone a very smooth and comfortable feel in the hand. It's fairly thin at 7.5mm, giving it a very sleek look, but the most impressive part about this metal build is that it's completely metal all the way around, so no seams or breaks. You won't find any plastic antenna lines that you typically would on most phones made of metal. ASUS claims that this is the first metal phone to be able to achieve this, and it doesn't seem to in any way inhibit the phone's ability to pick up a wireless signal. It makes you wonder why we haven't seen this sooner, especially from much larger companies, but hopefully this will be a trend we see with other manufacturers going forward. Like previous Zenfone devices, you'll notice ASUS's signature concentric circle patterns on the top and bottom chin and along the power and volume buttons, which are both located on the right side. It does indeed have a headphone jack, which is up top, and on the bottom is the USB Type-C port and a single bottom firing speaker. It sounds fine and gets decently loud, but it's not going to compare to a phone with stereo or front-facing speakers, and like all bottom firing speakers, it's very easy to cover up with your hands when holding the phone in landscape. On the left side is the SIM card slot, which has dual SIM support, or you can use the secondary slot to expand the phone's memory with a micro SD card. It uses capacitive keys for all your Android navigation needs, but unlike the majority of recent Android flagships that use capacitive keys, the home button here does not double as a fingerprint sensor. Instead, the fingerprint sensor is on the back, and it's got this odd rectangular pillar shape and not a circle or square that we're typically used to seeing. It's very accurate and unlocks the phone every single time, but the speed at which it unlocks doesn't feel quite as fast as some other fingerprint sensors, and I ran into a couple instances where it took a good 2 to 3 seconds from when I put my finger on the sensor to the phone waking up and unlocking. I'm also not a fan of the fact that it doesn't have any haptic feedback or vibration, so there's no way to tell that you're actually unlocking your phone when you're just doing it blindly. On the front, you have a large 5.7-inch Super AMOLED screen with 1080p resolution. It's not going to stack up to a Quad HD screen in terms of sharpness, especially for VR since the resolution is being stretched out on such a large screen, but it's perfectly fine for everyday purposes and looks really great for a 1080p AMOLED display. It's very colorful, vibrant, has excellent viewing angles and great contrast with the deep blacks that you naturally get from an AMOLED screen. It's a perfect size if you love playing a lot of games, watching YouTube or movies, and it comes with some handy features that are starting to become more common, like a blue light filter and the ability to tweak the colors of the display to how you want the screen to look. Having fewer pixels to push on the display also helps out a lot with the phone's performance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that ASUS skimped out on any of the specs. It's got the Snapdragon 820 processor that virtually every flagship shipped with this year, and it's got a massive 6GB of RAM. It's very safe to say that performance on the Zenfone 3 Deluxe has not been an issue whatsoever. It's extremely quick with everyday tasks like launching apps or web browsing, has excellent touch response, and it's no surprise that this phone is very capable of multitasking with a ton of apps open in the background, including a couple of games, without ever showing any signs of slowing down. Despite ASUS's very heavy skin on top of Android, it still manages to provide a very fluid experience. ASUS's Zen UI sits on top of Android Marshmallow, and while a lot of companies have gone the way of trimming down and streamlining their user interfaces, ASUS has gone in the opposite direction. The Zen UI changes a lot of the Android experience and comes jam-packed with a ton of features, some of which you may or may not find to be all that useful, and if you prefer a more simplistic experience, this can feel a little overwhelming. Some of the elements also feel slightly outdated, like the app drawer, for example, still houses all the widgets, which we haven't seen on stock Android since the ice cream sandwich / jelly bean days. The out-of-the-box experience is very animation heavy, and while they do look pretty and flashy, some of the animations are quite long and can make something as simple as opening an app from a folder take more time to do. You do have the option to change some of these animations, like the home screen scroll effects and folder animations, to something more standard and shorter, but if you stick with the longer animations, it will make the experience feel a lot slower. The Zen UI is very reminiscent of Samsung's TouchWiz from a few years back. It's very bright, colorful, has a lot of very cartoonish looking icons, and comes pre-installed with a handful of ASUS's own bloatware applications. Although the experience can feel incohesive and bloaty, it certainly isn't all bad. There are some features that are useful, such as double tap to wake and sleep, a one-handed operation mode, and an integrated theme store that has a fairly good selection of themes to let you change the look and feel of the OS. Inside, it's got a decently sized 3000 mAh battery with support for Quick Charge 3.0, and battery life in my experience has left a lot to be desired. It can most likely last a full day if you're a lighter, more casual user, but if you're someone like me who likes to game and watch YouTube for several hours a day on their phone, don't expect it to last all day. Gaming can drain any phone's battery rather quickly, but I noticed that gaming on the Zenfone 3 Deluxe drains the battery significantly faster than many other phones that I've tested and used on a daily basis, like the S7 Edge, OnePlus 3T, and Google's Pixel. I always found myself charging it at least once during the middle of the day, and the phone would typically only last 8 to 9 hours off the charger before having to be plugged back in, which is a good 3 to 4 hours shy of what I would normally expect in order to get a full day's worth of use. With the camera, you're looking at a 23 megapixel camera on the rear with f2.0 aperture, optical image stabilization, and laser autofocus. On the front, you have an 8 megapixel shooter, also at f2.0, and if you're into taking selfies, it works pretty well for that, and it has a bunch of beautifying settings that can hide blemishes, change your skin tone, widen your eyes, or thin out your face to help you take better selfies. Just like the Zen UI itself, the camera app is packed with a ton of features and comes with 20 different shooting modes, such as beautification, low light, a depth of field mode, time-lapse, etc. So there is a lot you can do here with this camera. The built-in manual mode is surprisingly very well fleshed out. You've got the typical controls for white balance, exposure, ISO, shutter speed, and focus, but it also features a built-in histogram and a horizon leveler, so you can get a perfectly straight shot every time. With 23 megapixels, you might expect these photos to be very well detailed, but that just hasn't been the case. It's got good color reproduction and pretty good dynamic range, but the images lack a lot of detail and sharpness even in daylight shots. They look fine if you're looking at them as a whole, but once you zoom in, you can really see the photos starting to break down, and everything just appears rather soft. In well-lit situations, the shutter is nice and fast, but once you're in low light, it slows down drastically. The image quality really starts to fall apart, and despite having optical image stabilization, it doesn't seem to help out a whole lot here. There's a lot of noticeable noise and blooming in the highlights, and again, the overall image is just soft and lacking any sort of detail or sharpness. It takes a good 2 to 3 seconds for the camera to capture a shot in low light, and because of how long it takes, it became really difficult to get a shot that was in focus. There were several instances where I took a photo, brought the camera down to look at it in the gallery, thinking that the camera was done taking the shot, only to wind up with a completely blurry photo, simply because the camera was still in the middle of trying to capture it. It's a great camera in terms of all the features and shooting modes that it offers, but the actual experience of using the camera is a little underwhelming to say the least. The Zenfone 3 Deluxe will run you $500 should you decide to pick one up, which isn't a bad price tag, but there certainly are several other smartphones out there, like the Axon 7 and the new OnePlus 3T, that undercut this price and offer very similar experiences. It's got a beautiful metal design, a great looking display, and comes with a ton of features, but so do a lot of other smartphones, and the Zenfone 3 Deluxe just falls short in too many key areas to really make it stand out. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this review of the Zenfone 3 Deluxe, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up down below, and also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already, and check us out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Google+, all that good stuff will be linked down below, and feel free to follow me on social media as well. And as always, check out the website for more in-depth coverage, AndroidAuthority.com, your source for all things Android.